About once every other year, she throws a scare into us, makes it look like she's getting ready to shuffle off this mortal coil, and then she recovers completely. I think Mom does that just to make sure we still love her. Mom, we love you. Stop it. No, she's doing really, really well. But I bring the phone with me to bed at night, and I'm just about to drift off to sleep, and I get this email from Lee Stranahan. I had written to him earlier in the day asking if he was still withholding comment on the possibility of facing a grand jury down the road. And he's never answered that. Every time I contact the man, he sends me boilerplate text like this: immediately cease your continued harassing direct contact with me or members of my family via email and Facebook messages. Am I allowed to think about you? We continue. I have told you this repeatedly in several emails, and I have no concept why you continue to ignore my consistent, clear, and polite requests. You have no right to harass me. You're absolutely right. I have no right to harass you. I'm not harassing you. I'm a journalist pursuing a story. You are a source, and I'm trying to get you on record. When I print something new about you that's been handed to me by some other source, the ethical thing to do is to get a comment from you. So it's not harassment. It's what you do. I mean, you just write whatever anybody tells you, and you don't bother to check with anyone, but that's not me. That's you. I'm a journalist. You're not. Oh, wait, no, it says here, you are not a journalist, and it's bizarre you pretend to be one. Whatever the reason, stop. Cease all contact with me or my family at once. Well, there wasn't a whole lot I could do at the time, so I just fired off a quick little response to him. I basically said, no. So this morning when I got up, I looked at that email again, and I sent him this. Okay, I kind of gave you short shrift last night because I was in bed when I received your message, so please allow me to give you a more complete response to your bewildering email message. 1. If a reporter asking the subject of a story to answer a question is considered harassment, then the First Amendment is in serious trouble. 2. Consistent, polite requests. I've been nothing but consistently polite in my request to you, which you ignore. What goes around comes around. And as long as you are the subject of a story I'm pursuing, each time something new pops up about you, the fair thing to do is to give you an opportunity to respond. If you'd rather, I could start calling and asking for comment, but this seems a far less intrusive method for getting a comment. 3. I am not a journalist. Distinguished honor graduate of the Department of Defense Information School's Applied Journalism course in 1982. Same for their Basic Broadcasters course in 1984. Winner of the Navy Chief of Information Merit Award in 1983 for editorial writing, winner of the Iowa Associated Press Broadcasters Association Award for editorial commentary in 1993, first and second place, editor of several weekly newspapers in California and Wisconsin, City Hall reporter and featured columnist for 2 dailies, one in Manteca, California, the other in my hometown of Clinton, Iowa, news director at a few radio stations, program director and top-rated talk show host at WHBL in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, a liberal topping the ratings in a conservative town. Then, when I shifted from the private to public sector in 2005, winner of the National Institutes of Health Merit Award for my podcasting series, winner of 3 NIH Plain Language Awards, winner of the NIH Clinical Center's Jesse Ferguson Award for Public Service Excellence in the creation of a podcasting series for that institute. While you were flipping pizzas and looking for your teeth that you lost while buying weed, son, I was writing for newspapers, working for radio stations, creating podcasting series, writing radio features about the importance of clinical research, having experimental brain surgery as a volunteer, and writing a book on the experience. I have a bunch of self-published books, but one that was published by an actual small house publisher in 2004. Then I sent him some pictures. One of me sitting in a suit and tie at my kitchen table with 2 awards from the NIH Clinical Center. That was back in 2010. One of the USDA Farm Service Administrators Award in 2008, during that brief time I worked for the USDA. A picture of me in my office at the NIH, my position, writer-editor, GS13. A picture of my NIH Merit Award and my Plain Language Award, Gold. A picture of myself in the studio at WHBL Sheboygan, Wisconsin. A picture of myself in my office in 1989 as editor of the Arcadia, Wisconsin News Later. I sent him a publicity shot taken when I was program director and morning show host at WGUF in Naples, Florida. We used to call it Naples Talk Radio. I sent him a picture of me with my guest Eli Wallach. Remember him? Good, the Bad, the Ugly? The Magnificent Seven? Me and Eli shaking hands at XM Satellite Radio Studios in New York. Me with Maureen McGovern at XM Satellite Radio in New York. Me giving Mariette Hartley a pineapple. She was starring in Cabaret at the time, if the reference is lost on you. At XM Satellite Radio Studios in New York. And then a picture from back in the Navy. This was in 1981 or 2, I'm not sure. In the process of cross-rating from hospital corpsman to journalist in 1981. That was my official title in the Navy, journalist. I was a J.O., a journalist. Journalist. While you were pimping your wife and making tasty pizza pies, Lee, I was a working journalist. So no more of this you aren't a journalist crap from you, okay? Now are you ever going to answer my questions, or do I have to keep asking? And as I went to sleep last night thinking about my response to Lee this morning, I started thinking about how to prove that I was a journalist. Well, I mean, I could sit here and read stories printed in a newspaper, but you have no way of knowing for sure that I actually wrote those stories. But I do have a treasure trove of audio journalism, including this, my final podcast with the National Institutes of Health that was broadcast on March 10th, 2011, 2 days before I retired. From the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, this is Clinical Center Radio. I was taking the metro to work one morning in early 2006, and something caught my eye. It seemed like everyone on the train was listening to an iPod or some other sort of MP3 player. For over a year at that point, I had been part of a crew doing weekly audio updates for the NIH radio news service. As I looked at all these people with earbuds in their heads, I started thinking like the former private sector radio broadcaster I had been before coming to work for the government. Here was a captive audience,
And if 1 out of every 100 people on this train had an interest in medical research, we had a product ready-made to deliver to them to listen to at their own convenience, whenever and wherever they wanted. And it was 5 years ago today, March 10th, 2006, that the first NIH radio podcast hit the internet.
From the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, this is NIH Research Radio. Hello and welcome to the premiere edition of NIH Research Radio. I'm your host, Bill Schmalfelt. Every other week here on NIH Research Radio, we'll get you up to date on the latest news regarding medical research supported by the 27 institutes and centers here at the National Institutes of Health, the nation's medical research agency. This time on NIH Research Radio, we'll talk about the transition of medical research from the lab.
We use the podcast to talk about the importance of clinical trials in the search for new and better treatments for disease. And in my research on the subject, I found a clinical trial that fit a condition I've been diagnosed with since 2000. It wasn't at the NIH, but that didn't keep us from podcasting about my brain surgery for Parkinson's disease on NIH Research Radio in June of 2007.
So, since my right side is the most profoundly affected by Parkinson's disease, they advanced the listening probe into my left brain. As the probe advanced, we could hear what sounded like an AM radio that was not set on a particular station, picking up faint static. As the probe approached the target, the static began to pick up in intensity, like there was a thunderstorm in the distance. And they attempted a few different approaches. Each time in the area of the subthalamic nucleus, there was the crackly sound of neurons being fired. And they were able to increase the intensity even further by manipulating my right shoulder, my elbow, wrist, and foot, demonstrating that these were movement neurons that were misfiring. Dr. Conrad remarked how easy it had been to find the area. Now they secured the target area, it was time for the stimulation.
Since late 2007, NIH Research Radio has been directed by the capable hands of Joe Belinfy and Wally Akinso. In September 2008, I reported to work at the NIH Clinical Center, where we began podcasting Clinical Center Radio, what you're listening to right now. Since 2006, podcasting has caught on like a grass fire on a dry, windy prairie. Everyone is doing it. And for the past 5 years, it has been my honor and pleasure to be the host of NIH Research Radio and Clinical Center Radio. And now, because of the advancement of my Parkinson's disease, I'm retiring from the federal government as of March 12th. I'm leaving Clinical Center Radio and all our podcasting properties, including the Clinical Center Grand Rounds podcast, in the care of Nicole Martino, and I know she'll do a great job. One final sentiment I'd like to share. Clinical research at any level is impossible without volunteers. Regular folks who want to do what they can to help researchers and scientists scout for cures and new treatments. I hope if you have a medical condition, you will consider checking out clinicaltrials.gov to see if there's an ongoing clinical trial that might fit your schedule. And they can always use healthy volunteers. If you'd like to know more about any of the 1,500 clinical trials and studies performed here, log on to clinicalcenter.nih.gov. From America's Clinical Research Hospital, this has been Clinical Center Radio. In Bethesda, Maryland, for one last time, I'm Bill Schmalfelt at the National Institutes of Health, an agency of the United States Department of Health and Human Services.
All right, I can hear you now saying, well, that's not journalism. You were a PR flack for the government. A GS-13 PR flack, but a PR flack. Well, right before I went to work for the government, I worked for WNAV in Annapolis as this morning newscast from 2005, early 2005 shows.
WNAV News Time is 8:04. Good morning, I'm Bill Schmalfelt. The victim of an apparent kidnapping is safe with his